Cryptocrash. Things seem to be going down for a lot of coins.
Yep.
HEX affected, unaffected? What do you think it's reached a decorrelation point at a certain level, or do you think there's still, Bitcoin goes to 10K, is HEX still gonna hold its thing with the nuance of the recent news, PulseChain stuff coming up?
Yeah. I think Hex continues to hold its own. It usually does when the rest of the market, goes in these adverse reaction periods of time. And the reason for that is kind of fewfold. First is the liquidity is not bonded with Bitcoin, which is pretty big, pretty significant, pretty important. The next is that Hex is a yielding coin, right? It actually pays you yield trustlessly, so you don't actually need to rely on a third party to provide you with an incentive to buy Hex and stake it. You have that incentive by default, which is your own free will to earn yield, right? So
Mm.
you always have constant buyers that are actually buying this thing that we call Hex. Um, Now, the other thing on top of that is the simple fact that you have the people that are already in the system, right, that are constantly buying it, and then you have those people that are being onboarded into the system that are going to be constantly buying. Now, how do we know that this is true? Well, if you look at the Staker app over time, you can see the quantity of the transactions. The fact that entities like Coinbase and Gemini, all these centralized exchanges, keep Hex off of their books actually limits their P&L. It doesn't actually, they keep it off with the expectation that it's going to limit their P&L, but it
Yeah.
actually reduces their P&L by not putting it there because it would actually enhance their P&L. But their expectation is the opposite, which is funny because it's just not true. Because Hex
So
PMs
P
are,
and L just for people who don't know.
yes, profit and loss. Sorry about that.
No worries. Um, so interesting. I definitely I wonder. So if we didn't have Pulse Chain launch, do you think Hex would be? Do we think we'd be having a different conversation about it? Or do
I
you?
think Hex would have never dumped, to be honest with you. Because why did it dump?
Mm,
I think expectations set it off so that, I'm sorry, man. Hold on.
no worries.
All right. I think they could dump because expectations for Pulse Chain releases got further and further set back from what expectations were at the time. In conjunction with the fact that people just weren't staked like they said they were. I think that's obvious now, looking in hindsight, because where else would you get these major dumps from, right?
Right.
I mean, we got major dumps, bro. We went from 50 cents to 10 cents. That's an 80% drop.
I can
That's,
barely remember when it was 50 cents. I just remember like 30, 40, 50, and
it was
then
up
like,
there
yeah,
for a little while, maybe a few
yeah,
days.
and
That's
then
it.
30, and then we're like, and then the PulseX sacrifice happened. And
Mhm.
then I almost felt like the 7777. Again, I'm not hating on Godwell. Godwell, I appreciate everything you do. Nothing against you whatsoever. I think it's just a noble action that happened. That it almost seemed like the air kind of came out of the balloon around that time too. When that happened, we're like, okay, and then just kind of chopped, went up and down from there.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing, right? Like Hex always does these bull flags, right? It always does these uh just these big bull flags, man. Kind of like it's doing right now. It's just doing a big old bull flag, and people forget, right, how bull flags can play out to the downside too. Um, and at the time, Hex was so up there, um, and people were just coming in from all over. But at the same time, you had these guys with these sizable bags that were ready to cash out, and cashing out, they did, right? Because when you see people selling 1 million units, 5 million units of one thing, that's going to negatively impact the market. Doesn't matter how good that market is, and that's what ultimately brought Hex down. 80%. This is where you get
Yeah.
these 80% dips from. People not knowing how to, really handle their wealth. That's ultimately what it is.